Okay, hey everybody, welcome to another episode of On Point EDC. Today we have a really cool review for you from a new brand to the channel, BRS, or Blade Runner Systems. They're basically an enthusiast-run brand, and they're most known for their popular battle songs, basically butterfly knives, which was kind of the street term for them. But they have since been expanding their flipping folding knife lines, and this is one of them. Now, this particular type of knife you would kind of generalize as a titanium frame lock. But this actually has one extra trick up its sleeve. It's actually an integral. Now, a frame lock, by definition, essentially, of course, is kind of the Chris Reeve style, or the Reeve Integral lock, which is an evolution of the Walker liner lock, and essentially just means that you got that titanium handle, and the lock, basically the blade lock, is integrated into the frame itself versus being a separate piece. Now, the thing that's special about an integral knife is that it's basically a single piece frame. So it's not two scales or two sides. There's not a show side and a lock side. It's just one piece of milled metal, which is very, very impressive. Of course, there's more. It's not a one-piece knife. You know, there's the blade. There's a screw in there. They also have some really cool tricks up their sleeve as well. And of course, a bolt-on milled clip. So, but as far as the scales go, it's one piece of metal, which is it's one of those things that's just, it's hard to do generally, and you have to design it, which is hard, and then you have to actually execute it, which production-wise it's harder to do. So when somebody does something that's purposely more complex or more complicated and they can pull it off, it just lets you know really the level of craftsmanship that's going into that piece. So I did want to touch on that. This is the Eon Integral frame lock, which is an Elijah Isham design, and we'll go into more on him and this knife right now. All right, now before we get into the full review, quick wristwatch check. This is actually my Raven. It's kind of an OG. This isn't, normally I'll have like kind of a watch that's going to be coming up for review soon. In this case, it's the strap from Hirsch straps that I'm actually going to be reviewing soon. So a little sneak preview for that. And I do have it paired with this Raven Trekker. These aren't available anymore, but they're actually refining the case. This is a 40mm. They're going to take it down a tad to 39 and actually do a nice undercut bevel on the case, which, I mean, this thing's going to be rocking, and even give it ceramic bezel insert and some different dial options. So I'm really excited to see those releases. But in case you're wondering that's what's flopping around on my wrist while I review this very, very excellent knife here. So this is the Eon, and essentially let me show you really. This is what the integral part is. See, so instead of it being two pieces of titanium there with back spacers or with standoffs or anything, it's just one piece milled out. So that's all a single piece, which is really nice. And very interestingly, what they did is this is basically covers the hole. There's an inset cut, and then there's a floating little blade stop bar in there. So if we close that, you can see this pin here. So that stop pin, essentially, now instead of it having to be part integral to here, you can actually replace it, clean it, which I think is actually pretty smart, really cool, that they basically kind of built those in to these little kind of spacers there, which is great on this pivot. So really nice, very nicely contoured. You might recognize this particular aesthetic from Elijah Isham. Basically, his designs are, highly sought after. He's a knife designer who's created knives for many of the top brands. His designs really offer a unique style and kind of a high performance functionality hybrid. Now, the thing that is really nice about here is we're getting a very desirable designer who's actually putting together a very technically advanced piece here. I mean, it's an integral frame lock, really nice, highly spec too. This is it has M390, which is one of my favorite blade steels, Bowler M390. It's a super steel, ultra premium. And the price on this is actually under $300, which is crazy because these types of knives typically are kind of like $600 and up. I mean, there's been a couple of brands since then that have slowly kind of made integral knives a little bit more accessible, but this is a high spec integral. So I'm very, very impressed. Obviously, one, it's a high end designer, and then with a high spec, kind of high complexity build. So you really can't be too mad at that. It's actually $289.99 direct from BRS. So when you think about the fact that most similarly spec knives are going to be starting at around twice this, it's actually something to really consider. It does also have a stainless steel lock bar insert, which is cool. I even like the way that that looks. Obviously, typically you'll see the lock bar insert on the inside. Here it's outside mounted because it's an integral. It's not like you can take this half in and then screw anything on that side because you have this much working space. So one thing that they don't have though on here, although it does have all the bells and whistles, it has a ball bearing pivot and everything like that. It doesn't have an over travel stop. So as far typically that's something that you'll see. I really don't mind it. I mean, there's plenty of great knives that don't have over travel stops. I mean, there's a lot of great knives that don't even have lock bar inserts. I think you kind of have to with an integral because I think it would be kind of hard to carburize the lock face on an integral. But for me, because this detent is actually so snappy and so strong, I kind of don't mind it because I can kind of over torque it and tweak it to kind of loosen it, so that I can dial in the action a little bit manually. So I mean, I don't think they did that on purpose by any means, but it worked out for me, so I really can't complain about it. The overall length, this is a full-size knife. This isn't a compact EDC carry. I do consider this a full-size. I don't consider it oversized, but at 8 1/4, it's pretty large. And then with the blade being at a 3.625, then we got about a 4.5 closed, which is actually pretty compact for the close. The blade to handle ratio. Look at this, guys. The nice thing is it's not gonna poke you or anything, but he really maximizes the entire handle with this blade, which is beautiful. I mean, you get this much blade with a relatively small handle. As far as comparisons go for size, I haven't brought this out in a long time, but here's my PM2, also an M390, a little custom job I did, whatnot. You can see there, pretty similar in size. There's a little bit of an angle on the camera, so depending on which one's more in the foreground, it's going to make it look bigger or smaller. So what I try to do is actually put them like this, so you kind of can get a good idea. Very similar. And then if we can't bring out, a Spyderco without bringing out a Benchmade. So again, on the custom side, I have this nice 940 in 20 CV with these great custom scales, custom milled clip, all titanium hardware. So yeah, the thing that I think is really interesting here is you have a silhouette, right, a lengthwise and a very organic flow in your hand that's actually quite similar to the 940, but you get actually kind of a thicker profile, with more belly and whatnot, more similar to the PM2. So it's kind of a sweet spot, I feel like. I mean, I still like both of these knives, of course. They're a little bit more trick in their locking mechanisms. But as far as like the size goes, it's very comparable, as you guys can see. I'll try to get it to where it's lined up pretty nicely there. So again, very similar in hand, in pocket. Of course, this is going to be a little bit heavier, but you kind of expect that. It's not like you can't like countersink a lot of milling in there. So the nice thing is they actually milled a lot of the exterior, and everything, it works out pretty nice because of that. It is a little bit sharp, I'd say. One finagle, I'd say, is like right around this area. Is just a hair sharp. So when you're actually flipping it, you can kind of dig that into your hand and basically kind of work it maybe a little bit raw. But, you know, that's really nitpicky. One thing that I forgot to mention is, look at this blade. It actually has a two-tone finish. You actually have the stone wash here on this nice high bevel. And then you have actually the rubbed flat, which is really beautiful. Then you got really nicely done. That tip is gorgeous. And this is not a thin, super slicey knife, but it is super sharp, and it's actually ground pretty thin. You know, really nice ergonomics. It fills the hand. You know, there are some potential kind of hot spots near the butt of the knife, but you can get a really nice grasp on it. Of course, being kind of that full size, and then even if you want to get to more kind of EDC oriented cuts, this thing does feel really good, natural in the hand, but it just can be a little bit sharp towards the butt. The rest of the contours up here don't really bother me at all. Even the milled pocket clip doesn't really bother me as far as like hot spots go. One thing that you saw here is when I go like this, the detent is actually so strong sometimes it won't, like, instead of me like whipping it down, it'll relock. Like, that's how strong the detent is. Typically you pull one of these numbers and the blade just wants to go down with a little shake, right? Which it did that time. But there's a lot of times I'll catch myself and I'll just accidentally re-engage the lock. So that's something to be aware of. I mean, that's just how strong that detent is. And I think a lot of it also has to do with the detent ball itself. I think it's probably sticking out more of the frame than it really needs to. As you can see there, it really engages. That thing locks in. I think if they dialed that back, it would make the action just a little bit more enjoyable, a little bit more fidgetable, versus you kind of have to be a little bit more purposeful with it, which, you know, I guess is good for a knife. Obviously, for safety reasons, you do want to be quite purposeful with it. This thing's stellar, though. I'm really impressed. Even this little kind of symbology here ends up being a nice grip point if you really need it. And then, of course, the contouring, although this is kind of, you know, a blasted finish, almost, I wouldn't call it slick, but maybe semi-slick. Because of the contours, it does give your fingers places to grip and to get some purchase on. So really nice in hand, super natural. Obviously, this nice, the tail end here, although you can consider it a little bit sharp, the nice thing is when you have it in pocket, your hand's going to easily glide past that. And of course, it's an integral, so it's not like there's anything to get caught in between, you know, or any type of rubbing like that. So that's really nice. It does have this lanyard hole, which I think is actually quite stylish. It actually balances out with the kind of eyelet here in the blade, which isn't for flipping at all. I mean, obviously the detent's super strong, but I don't think it was even designed. It's more of a design aspect, but as you can see, it kind of mirrors. There we have just the mirroring of different lines and contours in the blade and the handle, which is very organic and just really well thought out from a design aspect. So again, you know, of course you have that really smooth, snappy open. That ball bearing pivot just does the job. You know, the detent is I'd say a hair too strong. And you do got some lock bar sensitivity, so if I was resting my finger here, it's gonna be really hard to flip that, near impossible really. So you kind of got to get used to placing your fingers on the clip and then flipping from there. And then of course, you know, generally, although this is a pretty large knife, the flipper isn't huge or anything, so you really have to be deliberate with that. The jimping's nice, it's not overly sharp or anything like that, but basically this line here where you're going to be flipping, if you get too much on there, then your finger's going to basically kind of hit this point, which isn't the softest, you know, thing for your finger to be running across over and over and over again. So you kind of do have to, again, you just have to be a little bit deliberate with it. So basically, as you saw, I just pulled away. It's kind of a pull down and away. You can't really like swipe down smooth because you're going to hit this bump right here. It's just going to kind of annoy your finger over time. So, man, it's a good looking knife. You know, as far as comparable options go, there's really not too many other integral frame locks at this price point. You know, one example is the excellent Monterey Bay Knives XLC, which is probably similarly priced, but it's definitely much more of a minimalist design. So I don't even know if you would cross shop these two. They're definitely both very desirable. Of course, being integrals with M390, and also from great designers, Elijah Isham and Ray Laconico. I mean, absolutely some of the best designers that are out there. I love Ray Laconico's designs, but you know, it's a very different look and aesthetic. So I don't know if you would necessarily cross shop these two against each other. I think if you really are into kind of these flowing designs, you might not necessarily, you know, be real big into Ray Laconico's designs because they're a lot more minimalist and kind of stick shaped, which he does beautifully, but you know, just kind of an apples to oranges comparison. I think from a design aspect, there's not a lot of kind of overly complex design or finish elements that they really try to do. Here, it's really an exercise of excellence. They're doing things that are complex, that are hard to do. You know, they're putting shapes in there and smoothing them out, and you know, being really tricky with certain design elements. You know, whether it's contouring certain lines that flow within the milled clip into the handle, into the blade. I mean, there's just a lot going on from a design perspective. So that's why I don't think there's too much you can really compare this to. At least that's not an integral. There's other Isham designs that are going to be, you know, more typical frame locks that you could probably compare a little bit more closely. But I mean, at the pricing and the size, again, guys, typically a bigger knife costs more. You pay more for the full-size version. So this thing, even at the price point, is actually pretty cheap for just a full-sized M390 frame lock. So then you kind of combine that with the fact that it's an integral and milled pocket clip, all that, M390. It makes a pretty strong, you know, proposal, I think, for a value proposition. So I mean, this thing is really just insanely good. It's just short of perfect, honestly, and it is really a really nice flagship knife for BRS and an excellent full-sized carry option. So with that said, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you like the video, please do a like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this.